Hello everyone, and welcome to UWM's third annual 3-Minute Thesis Finals. I'm Steve Strelo, Director of Marketing and Communications for UWM's Graduate School. We're so glad that you could join us today for this unique version of our competition. Normally, our finalists compete on stage, in front of a live audience and judging panel. However, due to current circumstances, we needed to modify our format. We did not want to cancel what over 40 of our incredible graduate students had started, so we decided to convert our finals into a virtual program. Joining us today from their home stages are 12 finalists presenting their research in a 3-minute format. The finalists will be judged by 4 esteemed judges who will be introduced later in the program. Participants are judged on content, engagement, communication, and overall impression. Our 3MT competition is held every year for multiple reasons. It gives our graduate students an opportunity to practice their research communication skills in front of an audience with no background in the research area. Participants must explain their research in just 180 seconds. Research, which is one of the reasons why UWM is ranked one of the top-tier research institutions in the nation, and one of only 2 in Wisconsin. The competition also gives us a chance to share our students' accomplishments with our friends, colleagues, and community. We love to brag about our students. I would like to first recognize the Dean of the Graduate School, Maria Gajdajiska-Josifowska, who was instrumental in getting the 3MT competition started here at UWM. Thank you to all of our UWM graduate students who participated in this year's qualifying rounds, sharing their amazing research accomplishments. And a special thanks to our qualifying round judges who volunteered their time to be part of our competition. And also, thank you to our co-sponsors, UWM's Office of Research and the UWM Research Foundation. Before we begin our competition, here's a special message from our Chancellor, Mark Money.
Hi everyone, I'm Mark Money, Chancellor of UW-Milwaukee, one of America's top 130 research universities. It's my great pleasure to welcome everyone, students, faculty, alumni, community partners, and friends, to UWM's 3-Minute Thesis event. Wisconsin and the nation face societal issues and an urgent need to intensify innovation. And our UWM scientists, researchers, and student contestants, you, are competing today to create powerful, effective solutions. You are part of a very special group of graduate students who are involved in cutting-edge research, discovery, and entrepreneurial thinking. The work you're doing is important and will create your path forward as future leaders, innovators, and colleagues. Thank you for choosing UWM, and best of luck to you today and in the years ahead.
Thank you, Chancellor Money. And now, to kick off our competition, is the Dean of the Graduate School, Maria Gajdajiska-Josifowska.
Hello, I'm Maria Gajdajiska-Josifowska, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the 3rd annual 3-Minute Thesis competition. This year is the 7th year for me as your graduate dean, 27th year as a physics professor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and the very first pandemic year in my life. So I want to start by acknowledging and thanking Steve Strelo and the team of the graduate school for all the ingenuity and hard work to convert this stage event into a virtual one. I also have the pleasure to welcome and thank our amazing judges and the faculty, staff, family, and guests that are with us here to support you. A heartfelt thank you to our co-sponsors, the Office of Research and the UWM Research Foundation. The 3MT finals are about you, our graduate students, and your research and creative work. We recognize you for your outstanding scholarly achievements and your potential for future greatness. You are the best of the best from amongst our amazing doctoral and Master of Fine Arts students from all UWM schools and colleges. You are what makes us one of the 2 top-tier R1 doctoral research universities in the state of Wisconsin. We're all winners as a result of your amazing research. So thank you and good luck to all the participants, and let's get the 3MT finals started.
Our first speaker is Aparna Deshmukh.
Hello everyone, this is Aparna Deshmukh, a PhD student in Civil and Environmental Engineering at UWM, and my advisor is Dr. Konstantin Sobolev. My thesis topic is Nano-Engineered Composites for 3D Printing of Concrete Auxetic Structures. When I first came to US in 2017, my Milwaukee friends told me that Milwaukee has 3 seasons: winter, summer, and construction. The roads in Milwaukee are always under construction, and people have to deal with detouring very frequently. The road pavements buckle due to extreme temperature variations ranging from as low as -18 Fahrenheit in winters and as high as 90 Fahrenheit in summer. The pavements cannot accommodate these changes in temperature and results in cracking and buckling of the surface layers. So, as a solution to this problem, I introduce auxetic concrete, which can accommodate this expansion as well as contraction. So what are auxetic materials? Normal material, when stretched in vertical direction, it contracts horizontally, but the auxetic material, when stretched vertically, it expands horizontally, that is, it fattens. So if you see in the slide, the hexagonal shape repetitive structures, when pulled in Y direction, contracts in X direction, but the new geometry beside it, when pulled, expands in X direction. This unusual behavior of material helps to accommodate the expansion and contraction and keeps the structure in a good shape. Though it is called auxetic material, but this unusual behavior is not due to material, but due to geometrical arrangement of certain shapes. This concept is being used in shoes, but it is not very common in construction. My project is to come up with the geometrical shape that will exhibit auxetic behavior and can be produced using concrete for the application of pavements. But casting auxetic material is difficult and time consuming due to its complex geometry. So we opt for 3D printing of concrete. But conventional concrete is not suitable for printing. So another important challenge for my project is to design a concrete mix which will be easily flowable through the 3D printer nozzle, but at the same time it should get stiff as soon as it gets out from the nozzle to avoid collapse. And this type of mixture can be achieved by addition of nano-sized particles, which will enhance the properties of concrete mix and make it suitable for 3D printing. The application of auxetic concrete is not only limited to pavements but can be used wherever there is wide temperature variation. So may it be on Earth or on extraterrestrial bodies such as Moon, where the temperature changes from 260 degree Fahrenheit during daytime and -280 degree Fahrenheit during nighttime. So in near future, when we reach on Moon, we will see auxetic concrete serving the purpose.
Our next speaker is Farnaz Fumani.
It was just 3 months ago that we were told the coronavirus was just a flu. There is no need to panic. The number of cases may have been lower if we were told it was pandemic in the first place. In 1986, the nuclear reactor exploded in Chernobyl, having thousands of people killed by exposure to radiation. They might have escaped if the truth had not been hidden to avoid panic, enemy propaganda, and public discontent. There is something similar in both stories: the reality denial to avoid crisis. We all have heard about the happy stories of kidney donation, stories about love, hope, and faith, and the fact that humans can live happily ever after even with half a kidney. But media usually covers the positive sides of this kind of stories. The question is, how much of it is true? Does it have any untold layers that nobody pays attention to? Answering these questions, we are conducting a series of experiments with the collaboration of Medical College of Wisconsin to study the possible disruption in kidney function after donation. In our test, using a novel optical imaging system, we compared the energy production level in rats with single kidney to the normal ones 3 days after surgery. Our results shows a significant drop in the energy production level in rats with single kidney, which means if this reduction perseveres during long term, it can contribute to chronic kidney diseases and high blood pressure in donors, which would be a disaster. As a researcher, I need to confront the reality. That's why our ongoing stage of experiment is to study the performance of a single kidney during different time intervals to examine our assumption in the long term. If our marker still shows a reduction in the long term, we hope our findings will help researchers from pharmaceutical companies to come up with a new medicine to minimize risk of kidney donation. If not, at least our research would help us to keep an open mind, to face the reality before it hits us in the face, to accept or deny something based on science and not some delightful advertisements. Organ donations shouldn't be a tragedy. It should be just a pure story of love.
Our next speaker is Islam Hindi.
Have you ever tried to explain what you're doing in a dissertation to someone outside your field, your wife for example, and then at the end of the conversation, you got the weird look with the weird question, why in the world are you doing this? Why aren't you talking about something more fun, like shopping? Now, if this ever happened to you, it means that there is a miscommunication happening between you as the communicator and your wife as the audience. At this point in your life, you have two options. Either you quit the PhD and find something else to invest in, or you fix the problem. Now, if you decided to do the first thing, I can't help you. I'm sorry. But if you decided to do the second thing, I definitely can. And my dissertation is going to be the solution for your miscommunication problem. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my dissertation in which I will be talking about the side effects of using the wrong genre on communication and translation. Now, if you're still asking yourself, what does even the word genre mean? It means two S's and two C's. Style, structure, culture, and connotation. Now, as we have seen in the worst case scenario between you and your wife, you have the knowledge, but you use the inappropriate genre because of your ignorance of the audience, so your message gets undelivered. While in the best case scenario, when you have the knowledge and use the appropriate genre because you know your audience, so your message gets delivered. Now, in the perfect case scenario, which is translation in my case, you have the knowledge and you know how to use the genre in two different languages, and because you know your audience in two different languages, so your message gets delivered with faithfulness. The word faithfulness here means the degree to which the translator commits himself to the genre of the original text. In my dissertation, I'm examining two different types of text: religious text, the Holy Book, and business text, which deals with the documents used in the workplace. The results of my dissertation so far shows that the translator who didn't commit himself to the appropriate genre of the original text in the religious text ended up with having a fake impression on the targeted audience, which led them to ask, is this even a religious text? While the results of using an appropriate genre in business text led to inconvenience, confusion, and ended up with miscommunication, specifically because you're dealing with international audience. Now imagine this situation where two of your friends are engineers talking about something in their field while you're standing on the side, understanding nothing, and asking yourself, are these people like us or are they aliens? And the answer to this question is that they are people like us, and the only difference is that they are using genre that you and I are not used to. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Paulina Lim.
Imagine a family having dinner. Tonight, 4-year-old Jane and her parents are having roast chicken and veggies. Yum! They sit around the table and begin their meal. After a while, Jane's parents notice that Jane hasn't touched the chicken. So her parents say, Jane, try the chicken. Jane shakes her head no. They encourage her a few more times until they say, "Jane, eat your chicken or else you can't leave the table." Jane pouts and protests the more her parents push her to try the chicken. And the more she pouts and protests, the more her parents get frustrated trying to get her to eat it. After all they want is a healthy, happy child. Imagine this happens every night, with Jane's parents pleading and bribing, stressed out and at their wits' end, and Jane refusing to take a bite. This is a snapshot of what families with feeding concerns may experience on a meal-to-meal basis. Most families experience picky eating and mealtime tantrums. Unfortunately for most, these behaviors get better as their child grows. For other families, however, the types of food trickle down into one or two types of food, and the tantrums worsen. Parents, in turn, are stressed out and worried about their child's eating. And while we have strategies for parents to help their kids become better eaters, we don't really know how to help parents feel less stressed, worried, and anxious about their child's eating. So in our study, we wanted to know how feeding impacts parents' stress, worry, and sad mood. Parents who experience more challenging child behaviors, like throwing tantrums or throwing food, kicking and screaming while eating, refusing to come to the table, and families who argue during meals, are more likely to feel stressed out, worried, and sad. On the other hand, families who eat meals and snacks at the same time every day, remove toys and video games from the table, and have enjoyable mealtimes are less likely to feel stressed, worried, and sad. There's more to feeding than just eating food. Feeding is a delicate dance, and both parent and child play an important role in the feeding relationship. This means that we need to support parents while they support their child eat and grow. And one good way is to provide parents with skills to help them feel less stressed, worried, or sad during meals. So now imagine the same family meal with Jane and her parents. But this time, when Jane refuses to eat her chicken, her parents take several calming breaths and think to themselves, "It's okay if she doesn't eat the chicken. Kids need time to get used to new foods." They tell Jane, "That's okay. We'll try the chicken again next time."
Our next speaker is Rudy Marciniak.
Imagine, the alert tone sounds at the fire station, calling the crew to a large structure fire. Once at the scene, the crew gives it their all to extinguish this rolling fire. The intensity is so great that their fight or flight nervous system, termed the sympathetic nervous system, or SNS, drives their cardiovascular system to its near limit as they attempt to extinguish this fire. Once the fire is extinguished, the crew can then board the rig and return back to the station where they begin their post-fire call protocol. With the leading cause of death in firefighters being cancer, the protocols often utilize a sauna modality in hopes that profuse sweating will help to release carcinogens that may have entered the body systemically during fire suppression. However, after pushing their cardiovascular system to its near maximal limit, firefighters often return back to the house with an elevated heart rate, which has been linked to sudden cardiac death. In fact, sudden cardiac death is the #1 cause of on-duty death in firefighters, and with most incidents taking place following fire suppression, researchers are beginning to raise questions about the incomplete recovery of the SNS as a potential contributing factor. There is concern that sauna use following fire suppression may increase SNS activity during a time when it should in fact be decreasing, thereby creating a paradox where sauna exposure may reduce the risk of cancer while unintentionally increasing the risk of sudden cardiac death. In order to address this concern, our research team conducted a study where firefighters completed 15 minutes of sauna exposure by itself and following a maximal exercise task in gear to simulate fire suppression, in order to examine recovery of the SNS as measured by heart rate. Our results demonstrated that sauna exposure by itself slightly reduces firefighter heart rates. However, sauna exposure following maximal exercise significantly increases firefighter heart rates, suggesting high SNS activity. This suggests that sauna exposure following maximal exertion, like fire suppression, prolongs an elevated heart rate and delays recovery. This increases the risk of a cardiovascular incident. Utilizing these results, future research can begin to develop a safe sauna protocol to attenuate carcinogens without increasing cardiovascular risk. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Megan Orcholski.
Let's say I was telling you about a date I went on last night, and at the end of the date, things got intimate. I'm guessing you would have a different understanding of what happened based on the label I used. Whether I said we made out, we had sex, or I was sexually assaulted. Beyond these terms having different connotations, each of us is taking these words and interpreting them through our own bodies and experiences. This is called a definitional crisis, or when we think terms have shared meaning, when in fact the meanings are vague and shift based on context. As a rhetorician, I'm interested in how these discussions around sex, sexuality, and sexual violence impact intimate encounters, and how those encounters simultaneously impact our discussions. To further explore, I've created 3 related studies. First, to demonstrate this definitional crisis, I analyzed all of the sexual violence laws in our nation. The only way we legally define sex is through the laws that criminalize sex or sexual violence laws. My analysis shows that our current cultural assumptions of sex are hierarchical and heteronormative, and these have major implications for different bodies as they interact within intimate encounters. To further explore the implications of this definitional crisis, my second project is a rhetorical analysis of the Aziz Ansari public controversy. It seemed like Ansari was just the next man to be held accountable in the ever-growing Me Too movement, but there was an unprecedented split in communities that had previously been united around these types of accusations, with some saying that the victim survivors' experiences did not qualify as sexual violence. This chapter focuses on how bodies, positionalities, and experiences impact cultural scripts and definitions. Finally, I turn to queer bodies, or those that exist outside the heterosexual norm. These individuals always have to navigate normative definitions within themselves, so they're the perfect community to turn to in order to learn how we as a society can nonviolently navigate this definitional crisis. As a queer person myself, I was able to interview other queer bodies for how they conceptualize and define sex. This research is important because it expands boundaries of sex to be more inclusive, and it puts the individual at the center of the definition, instead of cultural norms and stereotypes. It is my hope that this research continues pushing for change within areas of sex, sexuality, and sexual violence.
Our next speaker is Liz Ortiz.
Did you ever have a shiny new bike that over time got to look not so shiny anymore? Or have you ever seen a very old car? How about an old metal key or a set of tools? If any of these have not been properly cared, they're probably in bad shape. In fact, they might be corroded. In general, corrosion can be defined as the deterioration of a material because of a reaction with its environment. Corrosion happens in so many situations, but more importantly, is a costly problem. Currently, the American industry spends around $500 billion each year dealing with corrosion issues, being one of the largest single expenses in the US economy. So, same as you would find corrosion in your bike or your car, the American industry finds corrosion in their petrochemical reactors. One type of this corrosion is called carburization. Carburization is an internal phenomenon caused by carbon deposition on the surface of the metal. This carbon deposition is due to chemical reactions in the atmospheres that these materials are exposed to, so they lead to carbon accumulation on the surface, causing a reduction in efficiency, corroding, and degrading the materials of the reactors. Traditionally, these reactors are made of metals that form a chromium oxide layer on its surface. These are called chromia-forming alloys. The purpose of this oxide layer is to slow the corrosion attack in the material. However, after long exposure times, typically 30 days, there is so much carbon on the walls of the reactors because this oxide layer has degraded. For this reason, the reactors have to be stopped and eventually shut down for maintenance. But what if I tell you that a new type of metal can resist for longer under the same conditions and have no carbonization on it? Well, my investigations indicate the potential to achieve superior corrosion resistance by implementing metals that, instead of a chromium oxide layer, it will form an aluminum oxide layer. These are called alumina-forming alloys. I have tested both chromia and alumina-forming alloys and have found that the alumina-forming alloys are 85% better than the traditional alloys because they have much less carbon deposition. As a result, these alumina-forming alloys are thought to be an alternative to the traditional alloys due to a more stable protective oxide layer for many industrial environments. With my research, I will be able to reduce the maintenance cost in the American industry and therefore reduce the cost of corrosion on our society. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Danilo Radovich.
Have you ever thought what Tesla and pencil have in common and how an answer to this question may help us to improve the Tesla? New Tesla Model S costs $80,000 and is still a dream for many of us. Bottom of this car is filled with a big battery pack, all the way from front to rear wheels. Production cost of this battery is $10,000 and it weighs 1/3 of the weight of the car. Material of the pencil sled is one of the two main components in this battery. Depending on its structure, we call it graphite or graphene. Just graphene is a single layer made of carbon atoms. While other parts of the battery are evolving very fast, pencil sled is there for 30 years, unchanged. Maybe that's why many of us do not own a Tesla. Luckily, here at UWM, our group created new materials that can reduce battery size and price and extend battery range and life. This material has a name, graphene monoxide. The same graphene that was left on the paper when I was drawing my Tesla, the mono and oxide, since we covered a graphene layer with many oxygen atoms. Graphene monoxide. We call it simply GMO. Do not be confused with genetically modified organisms. This one is safe. Laboratory measurements demonstrated that GMO has better performance than graphene in lithium-ion batteries. But there are so many materials offered for batteries these days that it's very hard to compete with them without a simple model that would explain why GMO really works. For this reason, I make heavy computations based on modern quantum physics to see how GMO interacts with carriers of electric charges, lithium ions. Not just to say that it works because it was proven experimentally, but to understand how exactly it functions and why GMO is the best solution for a future car, cell phone, or anything else that needs an affordable, small, long-lasting, and safe battery. I really want this material to find its way to electric vehicles and be finally able to say, "Hey Elon, give me a call."
Our next speaker is Richard Ward.
I want you to think back to the last time that you had to remember someone's phone number, or needed to remember which highway exit to take. Throughout the day, we're often presented with information that we must remember over a brief period of time. This ability to actively remember information for short periods of time can be thought of as a mental bookshelf, in which each piece of information represents a book to be stored on its shelves. But what if something prevented you from remembering information? What if our bookshelf was limited in space and you could only store a few books of information on its shelves? This kind of limit on our memory is one of the problems that occurs as a result of anxiety. We've all experienced anxiety to some extent throughout our lives. However, when one's anxiety becomes too overwhelming due to intense feelings of worry and apprehension, it can become detrimental to our ability to remember important information. Current theories suggest that this is due to anxious thoughts becoming stored in our brain, occupying space on this mental bookshelf, more formally known as working memory. The accumulation of these anxious thoughts prevents us from remembering other, more vital pieces of information that we should be focusing on, such as when someone tells us their phone number. However, there is currently little brain research that has examined whether these anxious thoughts are taking up room in working memory. Therefore, our lab sought to examine how anxiety interferes with the storage of information in working memory and how this is represented in the brain. Using electroencephalography, or EEG, we recorded brain activity as participants completed a task where they are required to store information in their working memory. In addition, during parts of this task, our participants would receive electrical shocks in order to make them feel anxious. By looking at brain activity reflecting the amount of information stored in working memory, we were able to examine just how anxiety impacts the storage of vital information in the brain. Our results revealed patterns of brain activity suggesting that when individuals were anxious, they stored less information in their working memory compared to when they were not anxious. This study provides novel evidence supporting the theory that anxious thoughts are stored in our working memory and are competing for space with other, more important information that should be stored.
More importantly, these findings provide an avenue for treating anxiety through improving working memory so that anxious thoughts take up less room, ultimately ensuring that we have enough space for books on our mental bookshelf. Thank you.
In Milwaukee, the difference in life expectancy between someone who lives in the 53217 zip code, which includes Whitefish Bay, and the 53206, just west of Interstate 43 and slightly north of downtown, is 12 years. How could it be that two areas only about a mile apart could have such a large and distinct impact on how long someone is expected to live? If you're familiar with Milwaukee, imagine driving or walking in these neighborhoods. What do they look like? You can probably picture some differences, such as the number of parks or supermarkets that are within walking distance. We know that life expectancy is related to wealth and opportunities. Decades of research has shown that stress and poverty can get under the skin and impact both physical and mental health. One approach to investigating how and why this happens is by examining the individual. We can study someone's habits, analyze their age, and look into their income and education. Psychologists are particularly interested in education and income because fewer years in school and lower pay is significantly associated with various mental health outcomes, including depression and anxiety. Historically, studies on mental health have focused on the individual, which I find strange because this approach largely disregards the political, social, and economic factors that determine whether someone continues on in school and how much money they're going to earn. It places nearly all of the responsibility on the individual and none on the environment. In fact, research on environment suggests that higher rates of neighborhood crime, exposure to pollution, and fewer educational and employment opportunities within your neighborhood actually predicts poorer mental health. In my research, I investigate whether neighborhood impacts brain structure. I use a measure of neighborhood that takes into account things like housing quality and the income of all of the residents in the neighborhood. In our lab, we recruit participants from all over Milwaukee from all different backgrounds and take images of their brains. My findings suggest that living in a disadvantaged neighborhood is significantly associated with certain brain regions being smaller or thinner, which usually means they're less healthy. These brain regions are associated with various different functions, like memory. This suggests that where you live could actually be affecting your ability to remember things like addresses, and it may be just one way that
where you live impacts your health. Here's good news though. The brain is absolutely incredible. And these changes usually aren't permanent if interventions are delivered in a timely way. My hope is that these findings provide additional support that brain research is a really important tool in identifying and addressing health differences in neighborhoods and in individuals. I hope that this project can fuel the development of interventions and policy changes that help neighborhoods and more broadly help create a healthier Milwaukee. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Carissa Weiss.
"90% of us will experience a traumatic event in our lives. 90%. This can include anything from a car accident to combat, abuse, or the unexpected death of a loved one. The good news is most of us are resilient after trauma, and while we may have a bit of a recovery period, we return to our normal lives. However, almost 10% of us will experience a prolonged period of distress and go on to develop post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Symptoms of PTSD include mental and physical flashbacks to the traumatic event, avoiding any potential reminders of the event, anxiety, and an overall difficulty to return to normal life. Early treatment after trauma exposure has proven extremely beneficial in reducing the risk of PTSD development. However, at this point in time, we do not have a very accurate way of identifying who is at greatest risk of PTSD development after experiencing a trauma. This is largely due to the many possible symptom combinations that vary person to person, as well as the rich and complex life histories we all carry with us. Research has shown that in those exposed to trauma, patterns of communication between different regions of the brain relate to specific symptoms of PTSD. People with long-standing cases of PTSD have different patterns of communication in the brain, even at rest, or when brain activity is measured while a person is lying in the scanner with no particular task or activity to do. This means that there may be some underlying or baseline brain activity that's apparent even when a person is not told to think about the trauma that could be a contributing risk factor to PTSD development. To better understand the brain's role in the progression of PTSD, my lab has recruited trauma survivors from around the Milwaukee area and followed up with them several times over 2 years. We want to understand specifically how the structure and function of brain networks changes in the aftermath of trauma. My research aims to understand if the pattern of communication in a person's brain just 2 weeks after experiencing a trauma can predict whether they'll develop PTSD months later, and if the pattern of communication in the brain leads to specific symptoms of the disorder, such as flashbacks or avoiding reminders of the trauma. If we can answer these questions, then we can engage trauma survivors in treatment plans before they even show symptoms and potentially stave off the onset of the disorder altogether. And if we can understand the connection between the brain and symptoms, then we can provide more targeted and effective treatments
that more directly address symptoms of trauma survivors. Though trauma is often unexpected and unavoidable, understanding the brain's response to trauma can provide us with insights to develop better treatments so that no one must endure living with PTSD. Thank you.
Our final speaker in the competition is Jennifer Wu.
I'm an epidemiologist, and prior to COVID-19, I was often asked if I studied the skin. I would answer no, those are dermatologists. However, I do study how the stress that we experience in our early chapters can get under our skin and influence the stories of our adult health. In my dissertation, I investigated how early life trauma affects 3 aspects of adult health, namely incident breast cancer, markers of stress management, and how our cells age independent of the number of birthdays we've celebrated. To do this, I used a national study of over 50,000 women who've been followed over the past 15 years in order to capture the stories of their health. And in my first aim, I looked at the relationship between early life trauma and breast cancer, which affects 1 in 8 women in the US. I found no correlation between the number of early life traumas and breast cancer, but women who reported specific combinations of trauma, such as sexual trauma and household dysfunction, were 15% more likely to develop breast cancer than women who reported no or low early life trauma. So you might ask, how can something that occurred so long ago affect a woman's health 30 years later? And part of that answer is that stressful experiences tend to stick with us forever. Our bodies remember through a process called stress embodiment, in which stressors such as natural disasters, neglect or abuse, or even our childhood neighborhood can get under our skin and affect our health. A key part of this process is called DNA methylation, in which methyl groups bind to our genes. And our genes represent this comprehensive instruction manual on how our body should work. And when methyl groups, which we can think of as chemical post-it notes, are added to the manual, it can change the instructions and cause our bodies to malfunction. So in my second aim, I looked at methylation of the stress management gene NR3C1. Although there was no sweeping differences in overall methylation, I did find methylation patterns associated specifically with early life sexual trauma and household dysfunction, similar to my breast cancer findings. And finally, I looked at cellular aging, which differs from chronological age. Cellular aging can be measured by looking at the ends of our chromosomes called telomeres. Every time our cells divide, our telomeres get shorter. And when stressed, our cells divide more frequently, resulting in shorter telomeres and poorer health. In my work, I found that high levels of early life trauma was associated with significant telomere attrition. So in summary, specific types of early life trauma can get under our skin to affect breast cancer, modify stress management genes, and increase cellular aging. We can't change the embodied experiences that we experienced, but understanding these mechanisms are important to identify potential targets to help mitigate the effects of stress and better understand how we can change the early chapters of the next generation in order to improve the stories of their adult health.
Before we announce this year's winners, I'd like to introduce our esteemed judges who are selecting our top 3 finalists today. Our first 3MT judge is Carlene Julius. Carlene is Director of Business Development at New Resources Consulting. She is a board member of the Sojourner Family Peace Center, which is the largest nonprofit provider of domestic violence prevention and intervention services in Wisconsin. She is also a board member of UWM's Graduate School Cabinet Committee and a member of Temple Milwaukee. Carlene also served as a press secretary for the Milwaukee mayor and was a television reporter and weekend anchor for WISN TV. Welcome, Carlene. Our next 3MT judge is Kira LaFond. Kira became market president and publisher of Milwaukee Business Journal in July of 2016. She oversees a team of talented editorial, events, audience development, and marketing professionals who work every day to help their readers grow their businesses, advance their careers, and simplify their professional lives. Prior to becoming publisher, Kira served as the Milwaukee Business Journal Director of Advertising for 2 years. She spent the balance of her 30-plus year career in radio sales and management, where she led teams of as many as 100 to financial success. Welcome, Kira. Our next 3MT judge is John W. Miller. John is the founder and principal at Ehrenberg Holdings, a venture capital fund established in 2015 to make investments in early-stage companies with an emphasis on companies located in the Midwest. The fund participates in real estate development in socioeconomically challenged areas of Milwaukee. Miller is also one of the top 5 angel investors in the Milwaukee area and is a key contributor to the success of Generator, a Milwaukee-based startup accelerator. John is the owner of Belgian Works Bicycle Studio in Mequon, where he hopes to bring his startup energy to the shop. Miller holds a Juris Doctor degree from the University of Wisconsin Law School. Welcome, John. Our final 3MT judge is Brian Wunar. As an influential educational leader, Brian's career has been marked by repeated success in rallying stakeholders around common goals and priorities for learning programs at the Adler Planetarium, the nation's first planetarium, and the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago,
the largest science museum in the Western Hemisphere. Brian is currently the president and CEO of Discovery World and is inspired by the natural curiosity of children. Brian has dedicated his entire career to developing accessible mechanisms that support meaningful learning experiences with the power to transform people's lives. These programs have reached children, youth, families, schools, and entire communities. Welcome, Brian.
All right. The judges' scores have been tallied, and we are ready to announce the winners of this year's 3MT competition. In our competition, the top 3 finalists would normally receive $1,500 for first place, $1,000 for second place, and $500 for third place. This year's results have been closer than ever, and we have a tie for second place. We've decided to recognize the top 3 score earners, with the first place winner earning $1,500, and the 2 individuals tied for second place earning $1,000 each. Thank you, Dean Maria, for increasing the total award package by $500 in light of the tie. And now, here are our results.
Tying for second place and each earning $1,000 is Jennifer Wu and Apana Deshmukh. Congratulations, Jennifer and Apana. And this year's first place winner, earning an award of $1,500, is Rudy Marciniak. Congratulations, Rudy.
And that concludes this year's University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee 3-minute thesis competition. Thank you again to all of our students that participated, our judges, our sponsors, and especially to you, the audience, that joined us today. We hope you enjoyed our competition, and we look forward to seeing you again next year. Take care.